Tonight we're reading Johnny Appleseed. Many years ago, when the United States was just a young country, there lived a man named Johnny Appleseed.
Oh, that's a true story and we have read it before.
You're right. We read a different version. He wasn't very tall, and he had a long, scraggly beard, a great big grin, and eyes as blue as the bluest cornflowers. We used to call you Johnny Appleseed.
Why?
Because what's your favorite food?
Apples.
Apples. Now, some folks said Johnny Appleseed was a strange-looking fella because he wore a pair of patch pants and used an old piece of rope for a belt. Sometimes he wore a patched-up old shirt, and sometimes he wore no shirt at all. He didn't even own a pair of shoes. Instead of a hat, he wore an old mush pot on his head.
That's a mush pot.
I think it's probably a pot that he used to cook his oatmeal. And over his shoulder he always carried a big old leather pouch stuffed full of apple seeds. Johnny Appleseed wasn't always called that. As a small boy, he was called John Chapman, or plain old Johnny for short. He was born in what is now the state of Massachusetts. In those days, Massachusetts was a green land of rolling hills and well-tended farms. Best of all, as far as Johnny was concerned, there were plenty of apple orchards near his home. Johnny was sure that nothing in the world could possibly taste as good as a ripe apple fresh picked off the tree. He liked...
See?
Mm-hmm.
He has the same
love of apples as you do.
Yeah.
He liked everything made with apples, too. Apple
Me
pie.
too. I like apple pie, applesauce, everything made with apples.
Apple pie, apple cider,
That.
applesauce, and apple dumplings. Ooh, I'd like to try the apple dumplings.
Me too.
As he was growing up, he spent as much time as he could in apple orchards. He liked being there in spring when the trees were covered with white blossoms. It's okay. And even better in the fall when all the apples were ripe. It seemed to him that heaven must be like an apple orchard with apples enough for everyone.
He has the same love of apples.
Mm-hmm. When Johnny grew up, he got a job helping a farmer tend his apple orchard. Although Johnny wasn't very tall, he was strong and he worked hard, and the farmer was pleased with him. Mm-hmm. No one, the farmer liked to say, could possibly know more about apples than John Chapman. The farmer joked that Johnny should be called Johnny Apple, or better yet, Johnny Appleseed. And that was how Johnny got his name. The American Revolution had recently ended, and the United States was an independent country now. Do you remember who they were fighting?
Mm-hmm.
Who?
Britain?
Yeah, England, Britain.
Daddy.
Now they're the United States.
Daddy.
Yeah.
Daddy, I'm exactly like Johnny Appleseed.
Of Henry Appleseed.
Yeah, of Henry Appleseed.
People began to move into territories where no settlers had been before. There, they planned to build cabins and start farms. Every day, Johnny watched as families packed their belongings into covered wagons.
Next year, I was actually planning to run around planting a garden of coves, an apple orchard.
It'll take a while to grow up, but when it does, it'll be delicious.
I know.
Okay.
And I'll be there.
Yep.
It grows up.
Yep. Every day, Johnny watched his families pack their belongings into covered wagons and began their journeys westward. I wonder where these folks will get apples out there, Johnny said to himself one day. He couldn't imagine not having any apples. Why, then there would be no apple dumplings, no apple fritters, no apple pies, no apple cider. It seemed like just about the worst thing Johnny could imagine. He worried about it and puzzled about it until one night he had a dream. In the dream, Johnny was wandering through a great apple orchard, bigger and more beautiful than any he had ever seen. Then an angel appeared. "Johnny," it called, "Johnny Appleseed, I want you to go on a journey for me. You must travel west across the great forests and prairies and mountains. Take with you a sack of apple seeds and plant them wherever you go. That way, apple trees will grow everywhere, and there will be apples enough for everyone." When Johnny woke up, the sun was shining. The sky was as blue as the bluest cornflower, and Johnny knew that he must do as the angel had told him. So he got a big leather pouch and filled it with different kinds of apple seeds.
He thought it was a wheel.
No, I don't think you thought it was, but it's a good idea.
Yeah.
There were seeds for red Baldwin apples and tart Rhode Island greenings, seeds for cooking apples and eating apples, for golden apples and russet apples, and for many other kinds of apple.
For papples?
Maybe. I wonder if that's what
Apples are-
russet apples are.
What type of apple?
Yeah. Yep.
Apple.
I'm sure it's an heirloom. It's an old variety that we don't even see
What
anymore.
is?
The papples that we see on Cliff Island.
Yeah.
Then Johnny set out in the clothes he was wearing.
Johnny Appleseed?
Along the way, it started to rain, and he realized he'd forgotten to put on a hat. The rain fell harder and harder. Then, just when it was at its hardest, Johnny spotted an old mush pot lying by the side of the road. "That'll keep the rain off me," Johnny thought, "and it'll make a fine pot to cook in, too." And so he set it on his head and continued on his way. And that's how Johnny Appleseed got his mush pot hat. For many years, Johnny roamed all over the land, planting apple seeds wherever he went. After a time, his boots got so worn out, they fell off his feet. Since Johnny didn't want to stop to make a new pair, he just went on barefoot. There he is. He discovered, for some strange reason, he didn't really need any shoes. Even when the ground was white with snow, his feet never got cold. They never hurt him. Even when he walked on the rockiest roads. Some say this was because Johnny's angel was looking out for him. Johnny never carried a knife or a gun either. But the wildest wild creatures never troubled him. Even fierce grizzly bears and mountain lions acted meek and mild around Johnny Appleseed, for he was a friend to all wild things. Reminds me of Max and the Wild Things. One day, Johnny came upon a big old gray wolf caught in a trap. He felt sorry for the creature, so he set it free and bandaged its wounded leg. After that, the old wolf followed Johnny wherever he went, running alongside him just like a tame dog.
It reminds me of the true story, the fireflies.
Settlers usually shot at wolves, but they knew to leave Johnny's pet alone, and so the old gray wolf became Johnny's closest companion.
They don't want to, shoot something near a person that's, running along with a person.
Right, and that's Johnny Appleseed's buddy, right? Settlers were moving farther and farther west each year, and Johnny followed them. He planted apple seeds wherever people settled, so that there would be apples in all the new towns and villages and farms across America. Once a year or so, Johnny traveled back east to get more apple seeds. Along the way, he always stopped to visit the pioneer families he had met on his earlier journeys. He liked to see the children growing up
Apples.
and the log cabins and farms the settlers had built. But best of all, he liked to look at all the apple trees he had planted. It always made him happy
Wish I could eat an apple.
to see how tall and strong they had grown and to taste the apples
My
they bore.
mouth is watering.
I know, you're an apple lover. So right now is April, May, June, July, August. You have 4 more months until there's apples all over.
Yes!
Years passed, and still Johnny traveled. His friend, the gray wolf, died, and so he went on alone. The pioneers he had first met were now old, and their children had grown up and taken over the farms. Johnny himself was old now, too. His red, scraggly beard was as white as snow, and his face was as wrinkled as an old apple. But his smile was still as wide as ever, and his eyes were the same bright blue. One cold winter day, Johnny got caught in a terrible storm. Snow and ice fell across the road, and even to Johnny it felt too cold to camp outside. So he walked 20 miles to a log cabin that belonged to a settler he knew. When he got there, however, the cabin was empty. The family had gone to town to visit
I just can't
friends,
stop watering my mouth.
and their front door was locked. Johnny spread his blanket on their front porch and stretched out for the night. Outside, the moon shone brightly and the world was covered with snow. As Johnny closed his eyes, something strange happened. It seemed to him that it had suddenly grown as warm as a summer day, and all around him he could smell apples ripening. With a smile on his face, he drifted off to sleep and soon began to dream. In his dream, he was once again walking in a beautiful apple orchard with the same angel who had appeared before him so many years before. "Johnny," it called, "Johnny Appleseed, I've been looking for you. I've come to take you away with me," and it stretched out his hand toward him. "But what about my apple trees?" Johnny cried. "I still have seeds that need planting." The angel smiled at him and looked very bright and beautiful. "Johnny," it said, "you've done all I asked and more, and all your apple trees will grow strong and bear fruit for many generations. Now it is time for you to leave this world, but don't worry. Where I am taking you, there is a garden, and in that garden there is a corner where you can plant your apple seeds." "Very well," Johnny said. "Then I'll come with you." So he took the angel's hand, and together they rose into the sky. The next day the settler came home and found Johnny Appleseed lying on the porch as if he were sleeping. There was a smile on his face, and, it is said, in his hand was a ripe red apple. Johnny's trees have
In
grown.
whose hand?
Johnny Appleseed.
In Johnny Appleseed's hand?
Yep. Johnny's trees have grown tall and old, and every year, all across America, farmers pick apples that come from the trees Johnny Appleseed planted so
Hey, Daddy,
long ago. In fact,
pretty much most of today, some of the apples we have ate, Johnny Appleseed planted.
well, we're in the Northeast in Maine, so he went out west. So Maine and the
But
Northeast
Daddy,
had
the day
apples.
before, he was planting apples back in Maine.
Possibly. He was in Massachusetts, so it's not very far from Maine. So, and this was a long, long time ago. So there's, I think, back then, Maine was actually
But
part
Daddy,
of
this is just a
Massachusetts.
dream
Right.
that the angel takes you.
In fact, the next apple you eat just might be one of them. One of Johnny Appleseed's apples, just like you were saying. What do you think of that story?
Good.
Yeah.
Daddy, it's done.
Yep. That's the end of Johnny Appleseed.
Can we